welcome everyone. I'm Christine Kashkari, editor of custom programming at the Wall Street Journal Barron's Group. Inflation and recession fears continue to roil global energy and commodity markets at a time when most organizations are also focused on decarbonization efforts. Our guest today says that despite the current market conditions, or perhaps because of it, most organizations are looking at decarbonization beyond just as a net zero target. To tell us more, please welcome Jan-Willem Bode, partner and sustainability lead at Guidehouse, a global provider of consulting services for both the public and commercial markets. Jan-Willem, welcome.
Thank you very much, Christine.
So let's start there. What is changing in the way organizations approach decarbonization efforts that seems counterintuitive given the market volatility?
Yeah, it may seem counterintuitive, but I think what is kind of interesting is what's happened in the last 18 months, where we've seen a real shift in the way that organizations have started thinking about the link between decarbonization and resilience. For the first time, decarbonization, cost savings, and organizational resilience go hand in hand. And that is actually a real mind shift for a lot of organizations, because now all of a sudden they're in a situation where they can focus on both hitting their net zero target while at the same time increasing the resilience of their organization.
Well, I think the other thing that has changed is the return on investment expectations for decarbonization efforts, which you said in a previous conversation is now on par with core operations. So, how is that being manifested? Why is it significant? And what does it say about decarbonization timelines?
So because of that increased recognition of how organizational resilience, cost savings, and sustainability go hand in hand right now, you've seen a shift when it comes to the sources of capital. So previously, when it was about sustainability, a lot of the capital in organizations came from the marketing budget or from foundations. But now it's become a real part of the core of the organization. It also comes from the corporate finance facilities. And that means that also the way that people start looking at timelines is different. Like when before it was a relatively short return on investment that was typically expected from net zero investments. Right now it's very similar to just the core operations. That means that in general, the way that organizations have started looking at timelines is different. You look at longer payback periods for your own investments. You look at longer periods to procure your energy. And you also look at a different way of how you work with your supply chain. Relationships with your suppliers can become much more focused on longer term relationships as well, rather than just on short term and cost savings.
So, speaking of financing, you do see financing as the bigger problem, not technology. The UN, I believe, estimates $125 trillion in climate investment is needed by 2050 to meet net zero. So, how do you solve that enormous capital challenge we're facing?
Yeah, so the $125 trillion number is indeed a number that we also use internally. If you look at that, it's probably about 100 trillion of that is actually needs to go to investment in supply chains, if you look at it from a US and European point of view. And typically investments in supply chains is even more complex than just investments directly in your own operations. So what you really need to do is you need to basically pull out every single trick in the book that you have in order to get these flows of capital going. In principle, the problem is not necessarily the amount of capital, but much rather the way that they will need to be deployed. And I specifically like to call out the Inflation Reduction Act as a very good example of how you can actually start using public sector finance in order to leverage private sector finance to really start getting those investments flowing. And I think that's an extremely exciting opportunity.
Great. So, Jan, one final quick question. COP27 just wrapped up. So, what is your takeaway? Are you more optimistic, less optimistic?
Yeah, so in general, you go a bit through a flow of feeling very optimistic in the run up to a COP. And I think in this specific COP, there have been some real interesting announcements also within the context of public private sector finance. So, for example, there's a group of countries that have committed to procuring electric vehicles for all their public sector fleets. And the only way that that can be done is by looking properly at public-private partnerships in order to get those financed and procured. So there's some real exciting, very concrete announcements that have come out of COP27, which is why I am overall pretty optimistic.
Well, Jan-Willem, we will definitely have to leave it there. And on an optimistic note, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much for your insights on such a critical issue. Thank you.